Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Ecolab's webinar on best practices for preparing to reopen schools and universities. We know that there's still a lot of debate over how schools will operate this fall, so you may be preparing to return to some form of in-person learning or still deciding. Whatever the case, we're here today to discuss heightened sanitation procedures and best practices to help ensure that your students, teachers, and staff return to clean and healthy environments, whether that be this fall or next year. Just a couple of quick housekeeping reminders I want to go over before we get started. As Chris mentioned, our presentation is being recorded. We will make both the presentation and a recording available on the Ecolab Education COVID-19 Resource Library within a few days, and a link will be sent out to attendees once these are available. We'll also have Spanish translations of these available next week on that same Ecolab resource library. And for anyone joining us today that's pursuing continuing education credit, at the end of the presentation, there will be a question with an option to request a certificate of attendance. All right, next slide, please. Great, so today I am pleased to introduce Tim Van Harn and Casey Struhler, who will be your presenters. Tim has experience across a variety of sales roles at Ecolab and is currently our East Region AVP for Facility Care. In that role, he partners with J&SAN distributors, focusing primarily on the needs of K-12, higher education, and BSC customers. He also works closely with our Healthy Green schools and colleges, so has had some great experience in the education space. Casey Struhler has a background in biology, environmental science, and natural resources, and has held roles in both regulatory and RD&E. She's currently a senior technical account specialist, providing technical expertise to our global customers. In this role, she's developed expertise in consulting with customers on recommendations to address COVID-19 and has led the development of many of our procedures that you'll see here today. So with that, I'll just quickly go over our agenda before I turn things over to Tim. So today, we're going to discuss how to prepare for resuming operations, ways to safeguard your faculty and staff, and best practices for enhanced cleaning and disinfection, as well as how to reassure your students and visitors in this rapidly changing environment. We'll end with some time for Q&A, so please remember to submit your questions using that question function where the chat bar normally is at any point along the way, and we'll have plenty of time to speak to those at the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Tim.
Thank you very much, Alexis, and thank you everybody for getting on this webinar today. We're truly hoping that it is a benefit to everybody who's on this call. And without saying, goes without saying that student safety is obviously a very real concern, right? And while there are many different opinions on what this upcoming school year is going to look like, there are a few things that most all parents can agree on. In a recent nationwide poll of K-12 parents and guardians conducted by the CASA Public Strategy, it was found that 89% of parents are concerned about child safe return to school in the fall. That's obvious, right? But the interesting piece to that is that 61% may even consider changing schools or school districts if their safety expectations are not met. So steps taken to address these expectations could ultimately end up impacting enrollment, but the caveat to that and the challenge is that the expectations from parent to parent and staff member to staff member are not all the same. There was one thing that almost everybody did agree on, and I say almost because it was 94% that were saying that requiring increased hand washing and sanitizing procedures is an absolute must, and it should be required. Next slide, please. So as you and your teams are working to respond to these concerns to create the safe and healthy environments, we know your needs and the demands placed on you are changing as well. That starts with shifts in class sizes and schedules, right? So to allow for more social distancing and cohorting, Different schools are considering many different models, from shifting hours of the day to shifting when the school year starts, and to shifting spaces used, for instance, having lunch in a classroom, right, rather than a cafeteria. And this directly impacts your cleaning schedule, and it may impact the type of cleaning you need to do in different spaces as well. Next, enhanced health and hygiene measures. The focus has shifted from cleaning for appearance to cleaning for health. What I mean by that is, if it smells clean and looks clean, no longer is it considered clean. People want assurances that what was done, was actually correct, right? Dwell times, disinfectants, things of that nature. But this puts new demands on your team, and it may require additional training on disinfecting new areas and touch points as well. And most certainly, hand washing and sanitizing is also going to be at the front and center, and that may mean new dispensers in areas. It may be many more dispensers than you have right now to make sure we're keeping that demand full. Thirdly, visible safety and cleanliness. Just performing the proper hygiene procedures isn't going to be enough anymore. Students, teachers, and parents, they're going to want to know what's going on, and they're going to need education surrounding it. So this may mean shifting hours to make cleaning more obvious and visible, right? It may mean visible signs or messaging in the schools, or memos explaining those steps being taken, and checklists to verify. And a lot of that's going to come on the ask of the parents and the students. Lastly, optimizing operations. Of course, this is going to mean all new procedures, right? Or some new procedures, potentially new products, and most certainly additional training for your janitors and operation teams. With all that being said, that's in addition to what you are all doing on a day-to-day basis. You're probably not going to get a bigger team. You're probably not going to get a bigger budget, and this is already a very budget-tight market. So we know you need to do all this and meet all of these needs as efficiently as possible, because you're not getting the resources to be able to do everything else you're being asked to do. In this webinar, we're hoping to focus on those best practices to help you efficiently address those needs of all parties involved. Next slide, please. So many of you and your teams are working fast and furious, right, to put these comprehensive plans together to resume operations. Once again, we hope some of this insight helps you reinforce your current approach, because we're positive that everybody on this line has thought through this and has somewhat of a plan in place. But we also hope that in the instance that you may see some gaps, you can realize that, and we can act accordingly to help you resume those operations. Next slide, please. And as you think about reopening, whether it be partially or fully, it's of the utmost importance to understand the risk factors. That is rule number one, right? We have to understand that. And the risk of COVID-19 is it's going to remain until there's a viable vaccination or an antiviral treatment. There is absolutely no way around that. The virus is going to enter the operation via faculty, staff, students, visitors, even vendors like ourselves, right? And as you're likely all aware, the virus is transmitted between people through the virus-laden respiratory droplets or from contaminated environmental surfaces. Apologies. Next slide, please. Overall, a best practice to mitigate the risk of this COVID-19 virus is to implement enhanced hygiene. Public health recommendations focus on standard infection control practices, training, and compliance. But there are two critical considerations to this infection control, right? And that's personal and environmental hygiene. And when implemented correctly, they're an absolute winning combination, especially in this COVID-19 era. It is important to communicate the expectations for personal hygiene to the staff and students as well. Through this, you're going to need to do queuing and signage, which are a fantastic way to ensure everyone is aware of their need to wash their hands frequently. And I'll say that again, need to wash their hands frequently, but also to encourage that physical and social distancing of at least 6 feet, which is the new norm these days. Signage can also communicate the requirement for any PPE on present. And for those that don't know what PPE is, it's personal protective equipment. For example, you may have a requirement that masks are to be worn in public areas, but how are people supposed to know that if they're not being told that? So we need to ensure that the signage and queuing is communicated properly. The second consideration, environmental hygiene, is equally as important as personal hygiene. And really what this is the focus on proper cleaning and disinfection of those high-touch surfaces and objects with an EPA-registered disinfectant approved for use against COVID-19. Once again, I'll say it again, an EPA-registered disinfectant approved for use against COVID-19. And Casey's going to get into that a little bit more, but it is extremely important that you're utilizing the correct chemistry to do this work. And before reopening, consider dedicating an entire shift to an extensive cleaning and disinfection to ensure that successful return to operation for both staff and students. There are so many touch points throughout your operation, a small list of what's on your screen right now, ranging from public areas like classrooms to kitchens. And some of the common examples across many of the areas includes tables, doorknobs, light switches, handles, etc. It's extremely important for us to understand those touch points so we know what we have to do to clean them, right? And in preparation for that reopening, it's of the utmost importance that we determine how often, number one, these surfaces are cleaned and disinfected, but number two, by whom. Next slide, please. Faculty and staff may have some trepidation about returning to work or continuing to work in this higher risk environment. That goes without saying. We're all human, right? And in this environment, you don't know what people are thinking, but you got to understand that there's some fear around it. And as part of your plan to resume those operations, you have to be sure you've communicated with them the various safeguards and steps you have in place to keep them healthy. Next slide, please. So when developing your plan to safeguard faculty and staff, there are many considerations that need to be taken in place. From ensuring they are educated on the symptoms of COVID-19 and how they'll be monitored, to how to properly disinfect personal items to minimize any potential spread of virus. This all comes into plan that will ensure as the school opens, you have a sufficient healthy employees to staff the operation. And as you'll see on the screen here, this is a plan that we've put together. Yeah, thanks for going back, Casey. Going through this, you're going to have access to this deck, right? And you can use these ideas to build out your own plan, but certainly we're here to help. Your service provider will be here to help, but it's very important that this faculty and staff are safeguarded. I'm not going to go down the list, but please make sure that you're looking at this when you have access to it to help you build out that plan. Next slide, please. And it's important to ensure your faculty and staff understand proper infection prevention measures, such as covering your mouth and nose when coughing or sneezing, and disposing of those soiled tissues in proper waste container, right? That kind of goes without saying. We've been hearing that since day one of this thing. To staying home when you're sick, once again, that it's a common sense, but we need to make sure that education's in place. And also whom to contact when they're ill. Contacting a doctor immediately after the event of symptoms is extremely important. These considerations are above and beyond the personal hygiene measures previously discussed, i.e. washing hands often, and of course correctly too, and avoiding any unnecessary physical contact with other employees or students. Next slide, please. Hands are the primary mode of transmission, so hygiene must be implemented often. We've heard it, guys. Proper hand hygiene is rule number one these days with the COVID-19 environment, and doing it properly is key. And proper hand hygiene with soap and water is of the utmost importance. For those instances where soap and water are unavailable, it's going to be very important for a hand sanitizer to be offered, especially in those high-traffic public areas. But also, hand hygiene should be performed before and after a shift break, after using the restroom, cleaning or attending to a student, before eating, and also before and after use of PPE. And I can't stress enough how important it is that people are washing their hands correctly. And once again, when those water and soap resources aren't available, that hand sanitizer has to be an option. Next slide, please. Lastly, you want to follow the CDC guidance along with your local and federal regulations when considering the PPE requirements for the faculty, staff, and students. Currently the CDC recommends that everybody wear a face cover in public. The masks are meant to protect others in case of infection. However, it is important to note that masks are not meant to be a substitute for that physical and social distancing. Once again, going back to the queuing and the signage, it's all important to think about when thinking through these PPE situations. Additionally, throughout many areas of your operation, the new normal may be to require faculty or staff to wear gloves. Believe it or not, there's a right and wrong way to put on these gloves. And it's interesting when you learn that, but it is a real thing. So we have to make sure that the staff feels comfortable donning and doffing gloves, right? That's just taking on and taking off gloves and other PPE, once again, fully inclusive of the hand hygiene steps, which we've already covered. Next slide, Casey, and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so next we're going to talk about, how do you really ensure that environmental hygiene? So we've talked a whole lot about how do you protect yourself, how do you protect others, washing your hands, covering your mouth and nose if you cough or sneeze, but how do you protect the environment that you're working in? So we've heard this called the new normal. I like to refer to it sometimes as the next normal because, as Tim mentioned, we might be living in this world for a while until there's a viable vaccination or antiviral treatment. So, all along, Ecolab has been here as your partner in sanitation, making sure we're providing best practices for cleaning throughout your operation. But with this heightened focus on, cleaning and disinfection and having it be more visible to everyone involved when previously it was maybe something done in the evenings or, when students were not in the school, really there has to be a behavior shift at the unit level. So, you need to make sure that your employees understand and explicitly follow those proper environmental hygiene procedures. So in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide, you can see the 5 factors of clean, and they are time, temperature, chemical action, mechanical action, and overall procedures. And while they're all, very, very important to cleaning, I would argue that the one around the outside, overall procedures, is actually the most important. You can have the best tool for the job, but if you don't use it properly, it's not, you're not getting the full benefit from that product or tool. So the best practices we're going to discuss today are really meant to reinforce the importance of not only selecting the proper tool for the job. So do I use a cleaner? Do I use a sanitizer? Do I use a disinfectant? Where do I use which type of product? But also the importance of understanding those overall procedures and how to properly use that product. So as I mentioned, there's various tools used for jobs across your operation when it comes to cleaning, and there's everything from cleaners to disinfectants, and they're kind of on this hierarchy of what are they meant to be used for. So I thought I'd ground us with this slide, kind of just describing the differences. So a cleaner, it's really meant, it's formulated to remove soils from a surface. That could be food particles, dirt, or other impurities that end up on surfaces. A sanitizer, does a little bit more than a cleaner in that it actually can kill bacteria that are on a surface. So it's meant to reduce the number of those bacteria on the surface quite significantly, but there may still be some that remain. And then a disinfectant is meant for use on non-living surfaces and objects, and it will destroy or irreversibly inactivate both bacteria and viruses. So keyword here being viruses. There's a lot of misinformation going around. Every day it seems like, there's hundreds of articles published about the need to increase sanitization. And I just want to kind of clarify that actually you need to disinfect to address a virus. And particularly you need a disinfectant with a virucidal claim to address a virus, which SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, that's the type of product you would need to address that virus. So both sanitizers and disinfectants are regulated in the U.S. by the EPA, and they're both used to help manage public health risks. So they both still have a place in your operation, and we'll talk a little bit about when to use each. But disinfection is the name of the game when you're thinking about COVID-19. And then one caveat, these products are for use on inanimate surfaces. They're not for use on or in humans. So that's just something I want to call out here as kind of a safety when thinking about these product types. So one of the number one questions that we get asked a lot is, okay, we know we need to increase the frequency of cleaning and disinfection, but how often should we be doing that? And really, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, unfortunately. You know, CDC recommends that you should be increasing cleaning and disinfection to multiple times per day in public areas, so where there's high foot traffic. But really, this is a risk-based decision. So what I mean by that is you have your standard frequency of cleaning and disinfection. Maybe you used to clean once a day, and now with this increased infection risk, you know, that needs to increase. So as infection risk increases, so too should your frequency of cleaning and disinfection. And then you add in foot traffic. So, you know, at the beginning of the school year, if you're only bringing back half your students, maybe your frequency is at twice a day. And then maybe in the spring, you bring back all of your students, and that would need your frequency of cleaning and disinfection may need to increase again because now you have additional foot traffic and additional soil load coming through your door. So I think about it in this way, and I like to use this example. You know, Ecolab is based in Minnesota. So, you know, if I think of a school in rural Minnesota versus a school maybe in, you know, New York City, they have very different foot traffic and soil load, but they may also have very different infection risk just based on the sheer number of people. So that school in northern Minnesota or rural Minnesota might have a very different cleaning or disinfection frequency than that school in New York City. So this really requires an evaluation of your standard operating procedures pre-COVID to understand if they're still appropriate to protect your employees and students, but likely you'll need to employ more frequent cleaning and disinfection until this risk of COVID-19 begins to subside. So as we talked about, you know, disinfection being the name of the game and really understanding how to use that tool, I thought I'd share an overview of, you know, high level how to use a disinfectant. It's really important to pay attention to the label directions when using a disinfectant. So with sanitizers and disinfectants, the label is the law. And what that means is it needs to be used according to the label directions. So high level, the four main steps when you're thinking about disinfecting a non-food contact surface would be number one, pre-clean. And pre-clean is really only required when there's visible soil on a surface. So if you see food or dirt, if you can visibly see particles on a surface, it does require a pre-clean. But most of, actually all of Ecolab's COVID-19 disinfectants are called one-step disinfectants. And what that means is they clean and disinfect in one step. So this pre-cleaning step is really only required, like I said, if you can see, you know, big chunks of chicken nuggets on a table or, you know, some dirt from someone's shoe ending up on their desk if they put their feet up on their desk. That's when we'd recommend pre-cleaning, and then you can go right into the disinfection step. So disinfectants need to be applied according to the label directions, either by spraying. So if you have a, you know, manual trigger sprayer or an electrostatic sprayer, we'll touch on that in a minute, but if they say spray, then apply through a spray mechanism, or some can be applied through immersion, so using a mop or a cloth or a wipe, that would be considered immersion. And then the most critical step to disinfection is step 3. It seems like the easiest because you're not really doing much, but what you're doing is waiting, and you need to wait to allow the surface to remain wet for that time indicated on the product label. So this is a lot of times called the kill time, or the dwell time, or the contact time, whatever you refer to it as in your SOPs and your cleaning procedures. I would say make sure it's bolded, underlined, highlighted, and everyone knows what is the contact time for the disinfectant that you're using, because if you don't allow the surface to sit wet for the contact time, you're not actually achieving disinfection. So super, super critical that everyone's aware of what that is. Disinfectants range from 45 seconds all the way up to 10 minutes. So make sure that you know what product you're using and what your contact time is. And if you aren't sure, please do reach out to your Ecolab representative, and they will be more than happy to help you determine that. And then the final step is to wipe the surface or allow to air dry. And a lot of people say, oh, it saves time, let's just let everything air dry. And I would say, maybe every other time it's okay to allow it to air dry, but remember when we talked about a cleaner, removing soil from a surface. So over time, there's going to be dirt on your surfaces. There's going to be product left behind if you're letting it air dry. And so in order to actually clean a surface, it would be required to wipe that surface. All right, so this slide might actually look quite familiar, quite similar to the previous slide that we just talked through, but in the previous slide, we were focused on non-food contact surfaces, so surfaces where food isn't going to be touching them, and it's perfectly acceptable to use a disinfectant. So we're thinking about tools to use. On food contact surfaces, we might need a couple of tools to help us address any concerns around COVID, but also make sure that it's food safe. So again, you start with the pre-cleaning step. Only use visibly soiled. You spray or wipe your disinfectant on, allow for that contact time, and then we get to step 4, and this is a really, really important step. In order to make sure that these surfaces are food contact appropriate, we need to rinse that surface with potable water and then sanitize that surface using your food contact sanitizer. That's usually going to be your product that you use in your third sink if you have a 3-compartment sink, or on any other food contact surfaces in the front of your house or in cafeteria areas, things like that. This is a really important distinction between these two processes we just showed, because many products are too strong at disinfectant levels to be considered appropriate for food contact. So in order to keep everyone safe and use the product according to the label, which is the law, this would be our recommendation for the best procedure. Your Ecolab representative, again, can help you identify which product you should use for disinfection and which product you should use for food contact sanitizing. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're unsure. So I kind of teased at this a little bit, that there's different application methods. And I know one of the most frequently asked questions right now, and something that's kind of come into an emerging market, is electrostatic spraying. So there are various ways to apply a product. Everything ranging from a manual trigger sprayer application, using a standard spray bottle, to pressure spraying using something similar to that. You might use this for traditional pesticides like a weed killer out in your garden, and then electrostatic spraying. So electrostatic sprayers are really gaining traction in many markets, including education, and that's for a number of very valid reasons. These devices apply an electric charge to the particles when they come out of the tip of the sprayer, and it makes them a little bit charged, and they kind of get attracted to other surfaces. So it's meant to minimize the amount of time that the product is kind of hanging out in the air, and more efficiently deliver it to the surface that you're trying to clean or disinfect. There's some special considerations if you're going to use an electrostatic sprayer or you're thinking about investing in them. You need to make sure that the internal components are compatible with the chemistry, and that the proper nozzle size is utilized, and that any PPE is worn that is required, and then making sure that surfaces are sprayed from a distance no greater than 2 feet. So again, we talked about the surface remaining wet for the contact time. If you're spraying from too far away, your surface might dry before you actually achieve disinfection, and that could happen with any of these application methods, but it's something to consider when you're thinking about electrostatic spraying in particular. So if you do plan on applying your chemistry using this method, make sure you contact your Ecolab representative for our list of recommended products, which is changing, as we have more approvals from EPA. Another most frequently asked question is in regards to cleaning soft or porous surfaces. So in the best practices that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, you'll hear me say a lot, disinfect hard, non-porous surfaces, hard, non-porous surfaces, and I'll say it over and over. So that leaves a lot of people with this question in their mind, well, what do we do on soft or porous surfaces? We may have chairs or curtains or some, blankets, anything that's being used in our schools that is not, we would not consider a hard or non-porous surface. So what do we do with those? And really, the good news is that early research has demonstrated that the virus is only viable for about 24 hours on these soft surfaces. So that's the good news. And so with that in mind, CDC recommends that you handle soft surfaces in the following way. So first, remove any visible contamination if it's present. Again, if you can see a soil, remove that with your normal spot treatment. And then you can clean the surface using soap and water or a cleaner appropriate for use on these surfaces. So if it's carpet, we have cleaners that are meant for carpet or upholstery, things like that. Definitely contact your Ecolab rep and they can help you determine which cleaner you should be using. If you can launder the item, this would be the best way to handle these types of soft or porous surfaces, and we'll talk about laundry best practices closer to the end. But the process of laundering an item actually has quite a big effect on the virus, and so we want to make sure that if you can launder an item, that will be our best practice. That would be our recommendation. And as far as carpeted floors or rugs, you can continue to vacuum as usual. Some customers are investing in things like vacuums with HEPA filters. It's not a requirement, but it may be, that additional level of comfort knowing that you have that HEPA filter in your vacuum. And I would also say that maybe leave the vacuuming for when there's not people in the area, just in case any particles get kind of kicked up into the air. But otherwise, continue to vacuum as usual. All right. So without further ado, let's dive into some of those best environmental hygiene practices that we talked about that can be deployed as you begin to resume operations. So starting with public areas, disinfection really needs to be the most frequent in these public areas. So when people are, if it's a reception area where people are entering the school, you're going to have a lot more foot traffic in that area. So if we think back to that risk-based decision on cleaning and disinfection frequency, this is where you should be cleaning and disinfecting most frequently. Certainly, like I said earlier, CDC recommends that areas are disinfected multiple times per day at a minimum, but it's really going to be determined either, at the district level maybe, or maybe down to the unit level, school by school, deciding how frequently do we want to be cleaning and disinfecting in our public areas. So the focus here should be disinfection on high-touch, hard, non-porous surfaces. Again, ensuring that those treated surfaces remain wet for the proper contact time. So you guys will probably get sick of hearing me say that, but if you take one nugget out of this presentation, I think understanding proper contact time is one of the most important nuggets to take away. Disinfect surfaces between interactions. So, some of you may no longer allow parents to come in with their students when they drop them off, but if you do, the recommendation would be, disinfect that reception desk before the next parent and student walks up, just to really mitigate that risk of COVID-19. You could offer hand sanitizer for instances when hand soap and water are not readily available. So Tim talked about this earlier. Hand soap and water, washing your hands, something we've learned from the time we were itty-bitty, is the best practice all the way around. But for those instances when you can't find a sink or, the hand soap is too far away and on the other side of the building, hand sanitizer would be the best practice. And then you could use signage to encourage that physical distancing and use of any required personal protective equipment. So again, if you're going to require masks on site, having signage to remind people, hey, keep that physical distance, but also please be wearing your mask when you're inside of our school. So some other considerations, maybe unrelated to cleaning, in addition to signage hanging on the walls encouraging physical or social distancing and use of required PPE, you could also have markings on the floor. Many of you may have seen this at the grocery store or other places where it's more difficult to maintain that distance. They mark on the floor and remind you, hey, stand this far away from your neighbor as best you can as you're checking out at the grocery store. You could consider removing non-essential items and rearranging common areas to comply with social distancing. So if you have a lounge or a place where students typically gather, it might be difficult to keep them from gathering, but if you can separate the furniture enough that they can still maintain that social distance, that's a great way to encourage that 6-foot barrier between folks. And then for any areas used for recreating, so I'm thinking things like a pool, you should ensure that the water chemistry is within normal operating limits, that it's stabilized, the sand filters have been backflushed, and that any circulating water systems are operating. And per the CDC, proper operation, maintenance, and disinfection of the pool water, so with chlorine or bromine, should remove or inactivate the virus that causes COVID-19. And to date, there's no evidence that COVID-19 can be spread to humans through use of pools or hot tubs, so that's the good news. If you do choose to, reopen these recreating areas like a pool, the main consideration is just making sure that people can maintain that social distance when they're using the pool or the gym or whatever it may be to just, again, really mitigate that risk of COVID-19. So then thinking about food service, so a cafeteria or a dining area, making sure that your staff is trained on proper hand hygiene protocols. Obviously they of course need to be trained on what are the high-touch non-food contact surfaces they need to be disinfecting, what PPE do they need to use. Tim talked earlier about how to properly don and doff or put on and take off gloves, masks, or any other PPE that you're going to require, really inclusive of that hand hygiene step. So it's important that they understand that because, sometimes they haven't had to wear gloves. If it's the person who stands there and allows kids to go through the line and check out at lunchtime, maybe they haven't previously worn gloves in their role. And so just making sure they understand, how do I put these gloves on? How do I take them off to mitigate my own risk from anything I may have touched that was contaminated? You can minimize the items offered on tables. So if you, have menus on your tables or shared condiments that people can use at a table, making sure that those are kept to a minimum, just to reduce the number of things that have to be disinfected between users. And then also encouraging physical distancing. So again, spreading out those tables or, offering new places that people can eat if they're going to eat in their classroom, or open up new spaces where people can kind of socially distance themselves while they eat their meal. That's a great best practice. You could also consider the addition of an expanded grab-and-go offering. So if you typically serve a buffet-style dinner and you're not going to be offering that anymore, maybe you now offer, a bunch of grab-and-go sandwiches, salads, things that the students can come in, grab it, check out, and then leave and go find somewhere else to eat so they're not congregating. And then our pest elimination friends wanted us to remind you that eliminating any food debris really is the best way to prevent pest activity in these spaces. All right, in that same food service vein, if we think about the kitchen, so currently there's no evidence to support the transmission of COVID-19 associated with food or food packaging, which is really good news. And so the best practices for kitchens are really quite similar to what we've talked about previously. Disinfecting those high-touch, non-food contact surfaces, particularly in high-traffic areas. So if there's only a couple ovens that are shared between many staff, disinfecting that handle on the oven may be a great option. Making sure that hand washing stations and hand sanitizer are not only convenient, but also highly visible. So people are reminded when they walk past, hey, it's been, 15 minutes, I haven't washed my hands, maybe I should wash my hands. And we do offer, things like wall charts and guidance on how to properly wash your hands in case people are, rushing around in the midst of their day and need a good reminder, hey, don't forget those thumbs when you're washing. It is one common spot that people forget to include when they do that quick hand wash. Make sure your staff is trained again on that hand hygiene, use of PPE, and then what product and procedure do I use if it's a food contact versus non-food contact surface. So in the back of the kitchen, there's a lot more food contact surfaces, so making sure you're using the right product to address those. And then again, thoroughly cleaning your drains, eliminate any standing water or food debris and spilled garbage to prevent pest activity. Oops, my slides are jumping ahead. All right, so best practices for public restrooms. Make sure that hand soap is sufficiently stocked. I don't know about you, but it really bothers me when I go in a restroom and I pump the hand soap and nothing comes out. And you look around frantically like, there's no other option. So make sure that those stay stocked, that paper towels or hand dryers are available, that all those hard, non-porous surfaces are frequently disinfected throughout the day, especially things that maybe are easy to forget, like that stall door latch or the lock on the back of the stall door. That's a great high touch point that people touch often with dirty hands. It's a easy one to disinfect. Another best practice might be to consider posting that cleaning schedule in the open for public viewing. So if you have a restroom that maybe parents are using when they come in, or that it's used by visitors or vendors, it might be nice to have that cleaning schedule posted out in the open so that people see, hey, every hour they're coming in here and they're checking and addressing and making sure there's no concerns. It's a great way to reassure all the users of that public restroom that, you're paying attention to these heightened sanitation procedures. And then make sure you're employing a bathroom cleaner, disinfectant approved for use against COVID-19. So we do have a couple options, and that way all the surfaces in your restroom are being thought about when you think about COVID-19. All right, so I promised we'd talk about laundry, and here we are, we made it to laundry. So currently there's no evidence to support transmission of COVID-19 associated with linens, which is another great thing to know. When laundry is collected, make sure that it's collected with, paying attention to how much it's agitated to prevent any unintentional contact with skins or uniforms. You could consider bagging your dirty linen in the area it was removed and avoid leaning into the cart. So again, avoid that unintentional contact with your skin or with your uniform. Just prevents that cross-contamination. When you wash products with an Ecolab detergent using your existing formulas, so whether you're using a high or low temp formula, and dry those linens sufficiently, this results in something called hygienically clean linens. And hygienically clean linens are defined as free of pathogens in sufficient numbers to cause human illness. So I kind of touched on this earlier, but it's a good reminder that, even dirty linen from an ill person could be washed with other people's items. And once it's washed properly and dried, you come out with these hygienically clean linens. So one thing that means is that it's pretty important that you have a dirty in, clean out policy. And basically, you need to ensure that carts that are used for dirty linens come in. They're only used for that purpose in either until they're properly disinfected or, always keep them for dirty linens and make sure they're labeled. And then you have your clean linen side of your operation where clean linens are folded, carts to tote the clean linens are kept separate from those dirty linen carts. And then disinfecting some of those high-touch areas. So, a laundry chute, if there's multiple floors in your school and laundry is collected on each floor, you disinfect the chute that it's being put down. The hampers or carts, like I mentioned, anything that's used for dirty linens should be disinfected. And then the washer seal or rim. So if you think about loading a washing machine with dirty linen, you touch the handle of the machine, you touch kind of the seal and the rim of the machine, and then you may touch some buttons, the control panel for that washing machine. Disinfecting all of those would be a best practice so that the next person that comes through and touches it doesn't get some contamination from your gloved hand. All right. And last but not least, thinking about the faculty and staff break room. So this is a common area where people are gathering, at the start of the day, during mealtime, at the end of the day. And so it's really important to make sure that it's properly cleaned and disinfected. This will ensure that your staff and faculty stay healthy. So this would be a good place to increase that frequency of cleaning and disinfection, especially during those high traffic times. Make sure that hand hygiene guidance is posted near any hand washing sinks. Another great best practice here would be to provide a disinfectant and cloth or a disinfecting wipe for areas that the staff is responsible for self-cleaning. So when I think about going into the office, it's been a while, but when I think way back, you get to the office, you take your lunch out of your backpack or your tote for the day, and you bring it to the refrigerator. That's a common refrigerator and shared amongst your colleagues. And you touch that same refrigerator handle that, all of your neighboring colleagues have touched that morning to put your lunch in the fridge. So making sure that you could self-clean or self-disinfect that refrigerator handle would be a great best practice. Again, making sure that seating is spread out to encourage that physical distancing. So, people are probably going to be really excited to get back to school and see their colleagues and want to be talking and catching up on their summer, but making sure that you spread out the seating to encourage that physical distancing and remind people, hey, we're cueing you, we're reminding you, even if you're wearing a mask, it's still good to physically distance. And then if you can, this might be less feasible, but if you can, stagger shifts and breaks to minimize staff gathering. So, if you can bump some people starting 30 minutes earlier, some people coming in 30 minutes later, you kind of get that cohorting and you minimize the amount of people that are interacting in these faculty and staff break rooms. All right. So I wanted to talk about a couple assurance tactics that you can use for your staff, your students, your visitors, people that may be coming into your operation over the coming months. And these are really ways to just reassure them that, hey, we've thought through our approach, we have a plan, we're addressing, any concerns that we can possibly think about at this moment. So some of those ways might be to prepare a message for your employees to share with, any students or visitors upon arrival. Tim said it earlier, some parents may come in or call in and say, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing to address COVID-19? I want to know because, you know, if my student is going to stay at your school, I want to make sure that they're going to stay healthy. So having kind of a consistent message across your staff is a great option. You might increase the cleaning and disinfection frequency during high traffic periods to increase the visibility of these tasks. So you may have heard this called clean theater. And really all that means is, you know, if you used to do your cleaning in the evenings when no one was around, maybe now you flip that and you do it in the mornings and the afternoons when students are coming and going. And that way it makes them feel reassured, hey, if someone's here cleaning and disinfecting during the highest traffic periods of the day. Again, adding any signage or queuing so that your students, faculty, and staff are aware of the expectations in common areas. If your state doesn't currently have a mandate for mask wearing, maybe you have decided as a district or you know, at the unit level that you are going to require masks on site. Having a sign hanging saying that, reminding students, hey, you should be wearing your masks at all times in public areas would be a great way to reassure others that you're taking this seriously. And then finally, you could consider giving students or teachers or visitors the opportunity to provide feedback on the cleanliness of your operation. So the parent drops off their student and they happen to use the public restroom right there in the lobby, you know, and they notice something that they're, you know, it's out of soap. Maybe they can provide that feedback to you and that guidance to you about something that would make them feel better about keeping their student there or coming back to visit the next time. So finally, I wanted to mention we have a plethora of resources available. They're being developed literally daily. This is being updated. And so if you don't already know and have access to the link, this will be part of the presentation that's provided to you. We have everything from information on the novel virus, guidance for, you know, schools and universities, cleaning procedures, checklists, employee training guides. So you may have a whole bunch of new employees coming through that need to be trained on these new procedures, or employees returning that have received no training on these new procedures. So we have some training guides for you as well. We have lots of videos for standard cleaning procedures, hand hygiene, that you can definitely use and plug into any training you're developing internally. So don't forget, your Ecolab representative is ready to address any additional questions or requests you might have for service or support as your operations resume. And with that, we'll take some questions.
Great, thank you, Casey. As a reminder to the attendees, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A section on the right-hand side of the presentation. We do have a couple that we can get to. Casey, I know you spoke a lot about the importance of disinfection. Could you talk a little bit about what you would recommend for floors? Is it just as important to be disinfecting floors too, especially in the education space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the main floors that should be a focus when you're thinking about disinfection would definitely be restrooms. That's one place I would start, not only because of COVID-19, you know, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, but there are other bacteria and viruses that we excrete in the restroom, and so that would be a great place to make sure that you're disinfecting those floors. If you have small children that are going to be crawling on floors or picking up toys off of floors and putting them in their mouth, it might be a good idea to also address those floors. But I would say the focus for disinfection should be on those high-touch, you know, doorknobs, light switches, things that people are touching over and over and over throughout the day. Great question.
Great, thanks. Also on the topic of disinfection, I know you mentioned electrostatic spraying earlier. Are there any procedures that people should keep in mind for when they're using an electrostatic sprayer in order to do it as safely and efficiently as possible?
Yeah, great question and very timely. We will have some new resources coming out next week, specifically around electrostatic. So it's a really hot topic, and we want to make sure that any customers are using we would recommend long sleeves, an N95 or dust or mist mask to prevent you from inhaling any product, and then goggles, gloves, just as much coverage as possible when you're spraying so that you can remain safe. Additionally, like I said, the 2-foot distance from the surface is really important to ensure that that surface can remain wet so that you can actually achieve disinfection. And another practice would be spray from a far back corner of a room towards the door, so that you're not walking into this where you're spraying. So we say spray a surface top to bottom, left to right, and kind of in that S pattern, and move from the far end of the room back towards the door. And once you've sprayed that whole room, we would recommend leaving the room for 15 minutes to allow any droplets that you could respire to kind of settle on a surface, and then come back and you can wipe down those surfaces. That's more than enough time to achieve disinfection with all of our COVID-19 disinfectants.
Great, thank you. A quick follow-up on that. Someone said, you mentioned electrostatic cleaning. I've heard this is bad for soft surfaces. Is it?
Yeah, so another great question. Electrostatic spraying, just as a reminder, is just another application method. So you do get a slight charge on the product, but it's really just meant to apply the product chemistry in a different way. So the sprayer itself isn't doing anything. It's not disinfecting. It's not providing any additional efficacy of the product, meaning it doesn't, double the amount of disinfection that happens or speed it up. It really just is an efficient way to apply a product to a surface. So the things that I would consider if you're thinking about soft surfaces is there are no spray application products on the market that can disinfect a soft surface. So if you're going to use it on soft surfaces, maybe to sanitize those soft surfaces to address bacteria concerns, make sure your product says that it's appropriate for use on soft surfaces. We do have a couple that can, sanitize soft surfaces, and you could use the electrostatic sprayer to apply those products the same way you would to a hard surface.
Great, thank you. While we're on the topic of disinfection, a question came in. Is it okay to spray a cloth with disinfectant, then wipe the surface?
Yeah, really, really good question. So that would be considered an immersion method. So that means we have supplied data to the EPA, and this might be a little bit technical, but we've supplied data to the EPA showing, hey, if you put this on a cloth and then wipe a surface, we can still achieve disinfection with this product. So, label is the law. Make sure you're reading the label. If the label says to spray it right on the surface, that's what you should be doing. But some of our products do allow for you to spray it on a cloth. If you're, spraying a light switch or an elevator button, my recommendation would be to spray it on a cloth first and then wipe it. You still need to make sure that surface remains wet for the contact time, but to address any concerns around electronics, it would be a best practice to spray that cloth and then apply it. So really just think through, okay, can I make sure the surface stays wet for that full contact time? If it's 10 minutes and you're spraying it on your cloth, you may have to reapply it again to the cloth and wipe it to make sure that surface stays wet.
Great, thank you, Casey. We also had a question about the best way to disinfect keyboards and mice in computer labs. I would assume what you just said about spraying on cloths would apply to that.
Yep, that would be my recommendation. You don't want to douse those electrical components with liquid. It doesn't matter what product you're using. Liquids and electronics don't match very well. So I would spray a cloth and I would wipe down all the keyboards, the mice, the screens. If you have a single manufacturer or a couple manufacturers you use of those products, you could ask them for their recommendation if they have procedures for cleaning their product. But our recommendation would be spray on your cloth and then wipe, making sure that you're getting that full contact time.
Great. Switching gears a little bit, can you speak to the efficacy of antimicrobial soap, hand soap, versus standard hand soap? The person asking the question says they think the most important thing is a proper hand wash, but there's a perception that goes along with antimicrobial. Is there any reason not to use it?
Is there any reason not to use the antimicrobial hand wash? Is that what they're asking?
correct?
So yes, I would say their feedback that the most important thing is hand washing is spot on. Just like with washing your clothes in a laundry, the agitation from you washing and scrubbing, that helps remove bacteria, viruses, any contaminants on your hands. So I would say that's the most important thing. Beyond that, there are perceptions that you need antibacterial, this and that, but if you think of what the word means, antibacterial, that wouldn't have any viral claims. It's addressing bacteria, so not really applicable when you think about COVID.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So on the topic of laundry, what about cleaning masks? Are there any special instructions for how to launder masks, or can they be washed with clothes as well?
Yeah, great question. We do have some more specific procedures around laundering masks. I would make sure that they are not meant to be single-use masks. So I have had questions come in, hey, we have these paper masks, how do we wash them? And some masks are not meant to be washed. So first and foremost, I would make sure, you're washing a mask that actually is okay to be washed. And then we do have, like I said, specific procedures around how to do that. If your mask has, let's say you're out walking around or you're interacting with a student that is presumed COVID positive or later is confirmed COVID positive, and you're like, wow, I was with them, I was wearing my mask, maybe there's some viral particles on my mask that I want to wash off. That can be washed with your other laundry as long as the formula is the same. So I'll make sure that that resource is available to the attendees of this call so that they can have that on hand.
Great. And then on a bit of a different topic that wasn't mentioned in the presentation earlier, what are your thoughts about using UV lights for disinfection?
Yeah, another really, really great question. So what I'll say is this. The EPA, as I mentioned, regulates antimicrobial products, and they only really focus on liquid antimicrobials. So, these products you can spray or wipe on surfaces. A UV light would be considered a device, and that's not regulated at the federal level. It's regulated at the state level. So there's not a lot of consistency across the board when a company submits data. Maybe they have enough data to get it registered in Minnesota, but not in Illinois or not in New York. And so it's not consistent because there's not a lot of federal oversight. So I would say UV, it's used in hospitals, it's used in other places as a secondary mechanism for additional kind of coverage and mitigation against these viruses and bacteria. So that would be my recommendation. If you're going to invest in it, use it as a secondary method kind of to complement the chemistry that you're using on site.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we are just about at time here, so I want to thank everyone again for the time, for attending, for the great questions and engagement. As a reminder, all of these resources are available out at ecolab.com/coronavirus-education on our resource libraries. We'll also be sending that link out as soon as the presentation and recording are available. So thank you all and have a great day.